money you spend every day, we have you covered every morning. Making money makes sense. Weekdays on CBS Mornings.
CBS News, 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS.
Nate Burleson, Barack Obama, a new message of hope for young people from the former president.
We can make progress.
CBS Mornings, Tuesday.
Okay, let's do it.
There's no progress that I see, and it really concerns me with the timeline of where we are.
The party has developed a culture of losing.
This bad bill needs a return to sender.
Hello, I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. We'll get to Special Counsel John Durham's report about the Justice Department's handling of the 2016 Russia probe in just a minute. But first, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen reaffirmed that June 1st is the deadline for possible default. This as President Biden says he'll meet with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy about the debt ceiling Tuesday. A meeting between the president and congressional leaders was originally scheduled for last Friday, but was postponed. Staff-level talks did continue over the weekend, and Biden has expressed hope that an agreement can be reached to avoid default, but McCarthy says time is running out to reach a deal.
This is where we were in February when we were talking, we'd be in a good place, but we're only a couple weeks away. And if you look at the timeline to pass something in the House and pass something in the Senate, you've got to have something done by this weekend, and we are nowhere near any of that. And so
For more on this, CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Gillian joins us now. Nicole, I'll get to the debt ceiling in a minute, but let's get to this news from Special Counsel John Durham. He's completed a report on possible government misconduct in that Trump-Russia inquiry. What conclusion did he reach?
Well, basically what he found is that there were some missteps with respect to the investigation when it was initially launched. This was something that has been of great concern, especially by congressional Republicans who have suggested that there may be bias within the FBI, and so they feel that this further fuels those speculations. But basically, you know, this was an investigation at the start of the former president's initial campaign for president back in 2016, and it was an investigation to determine whether or not there was any Russian collusion within the Trump campaign, if there was any coordination or foreign influence. And so through the course of that investigation, this special counsel investigation by John Durham, in essence, was investigating the investigators who conducted that report. And what it suggested was that there may have been bias within the FBI, and that the way in which that it handled this investigation wasn't necessarily conducted in the best way possible. That being said, the FBI has responded by saying that it has taken a number of corrective reforms since this probe was opened up many years ago, but that is still not satisfying a lot of lawmakers here on Capitol Hill, particularly congressional Republicans who are now calling on the special counsel to testify.
Yeah, and Jim Jordan is among them, asking him to testify next week, he says. Nicole, let's switch gears a little bit to the debt ceiling. What's the latest, just quickly, on where these negotiations stand?
Well, you know, we'll find out tomorrow, I think. You know, when talking to all sides, it seems like they are still in different corners. And talking to Speaker McCarthy, he has suggested that there really hasn't been much movement with respect to these talks. And as you heard him say in that soundbite, really a deal needs to be done this week in order for any type of agreement to be cleared by both chambers. We know the Senate is expected to recess later this week. The House is out after next week, and so it really doesn't leave much time to hammer anything out. That being said, I did talk to Minority Leader Mitch McConnell earlier, who reaffirmed that he does expect the leaders to meet tomorrow, but he wouldn't say if he shares McCarthy's view about whether or not there hasn't been any movement. As we know, there have been staff-level discussions for a number of days now, and so if they are not able to present something that all sides can agree upon tomorrow, it could spell trouble as we near this X date.
Yeah, the clock certainly ticking. Nicole Gillian on Capitol Hill tonight. Thank you very much. And for more on all of this, let's turn to Nancy Cordes and Finn Gomez, who join us now on set. Nancy is CBS News chief White House correspondent, and Finn is CBS News political director. So, Nancy, let's start with you. Nicole kind of laid out that timeline. Another, wrench in that system is that President Biden is leaving for Japan this week. How is the White House viewing these negotiations? Do they even see them as negotiations?
They do see them as negotiations. I think there's no way to sugarcoat it at this point. They are negotiating over spending caps, but they actually think it's going pretty well. They're not as doom and gloom as Speaker McCarthy is right now. That may be a little bit of good cop, bad cop, but they feel like the talks have been constructive. They feel that they are making progress. It doesn't mean that they'll necessarily get a deal on everything that they're talking about by the end of the week. They don't feel confident about that necessarily, but they do think that things are heading in the right direction, because they have to head in the right direction, because default is staring Congress and the White House in the face. And you've already had White House officials, the president, Leader McConnell all say default is not a possibility. So they say this is going to have to get done one way or the other, and they believe that they're on track to do that right now.
Janet Yellen essentially sending another letter to McCarthy saying, just a reminder, June 1st is what we're aiming for. Another policy item that the White House is dealing with, obviously, is the end of Title 42, which we covered a lot last week. It ended last week. They were expecting a huge increase in migrations across the border, not as many as expected, but still pretty high. The White House is still facing a lot of criticism, of course, over these really crowded detention facilities. I know our correspondents have been reporting on them. How is the White House kind of facing this criticism, and what do they make of these numbers?
Well, they are obviously arguing that things could have been even worse if they hadn't planned so carefully for this moment, if they hadn't signposted to migrants, don't come to the border. We're changing our immigration policies. You will face a stiff penalty if you try to apply in person for asylum, when there are other avenues to do that at this point. But they also acknowledge this problem is nowhere near over. They say that the structural situation that has already been in place that has led so many people to escape their home countries to come to the U.S., that hasn't changed. But what has changed, they say, is the fact that Mexico and Guatemala surged law enforcement to their borders, and they believe that that is helping to stem the flow of migrants to this country as well.
And Finn, obviously, this is an issue where Republicans are eager to go after the Biden administration on. We've seen that again and again in campaigns. Over the weekend, however, we saw kind of this real showdown between Donald Trump and Rhonda Santos in the Republican primary, or expected to be in the Republican primary. Let's play a little bit about what Rhonda Santos had to say with some not so subtle swipes at Trump.
In Florida, we really showed what it takes to not just win big, and then deliver big. And ultimately, when you're doing all this, what results are you producing for people? That's really what matters. You can sit there and talk about cable news, social media, all these other things that people are fixated on. And for me, it's like, okay, what's that true north? You obviously got to win, otherwise you don't get a ticket to the dance.
All right, so he's saying that Republicans need to win. This is clearly a reference to the former president, but he's not willing to attack him directly, and he's also not willing, at least, to say publicly that Trump lost the election. What's going on with them?
Yeah, but I think some of his supporters would say this is the most contrast he's offered. He's been receiving criticism from not only internally but externally from Republicans, saying, if what's the holdup? Trump has been attacking him for weeks, for months. But because, now that he's in Iowa, let's talk about Iowa specifically. It's supposed to be this dueling event. Of course, that was changed at the last minute because the Trump campaign canceled the event in Des Moines due to a tornado watch. DeSantis did have his events both on the west side of Iowa and also on the east side. And also they did an unscheduled stop in Des Moines, specifically, according to those in DeSantis' world, to sort of mock the former president, for not showing up in Iowa. And I think it was a taste and a precursor of what's to come in a few weeks, when we do expect when we do expect the Florida governor to enter into the race officially. Today, CBS News can confirm via Aaron Navarro that his headquarters in Tallahassee will be moving from his location that was at the state GOP headquarters. It's now going to be moving, and because of that move, it's more than $5,000 more, which automatically triggers an FEC notification that he has to make, and he has to declare his candidacy. He has to officially register within the next 15 days from now. So we do expect him to formally announce. Jump into the race in the next couple weeks.
This is how we read the tea leaves, looking at rental agreements and moving boxes. Right. So, Finn, we will keep track of all of that. And we also know that his communications, his press secretary has moved from his official office to his political side.
You reported that, yeah.
A lot of moves being made on this front. Thank you both, Nancy and Finn, for being here, covering it all for us. And speaking of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, he says the Republican Party has developed a culture of losing. This is a not-so-subtle swipe at the former president, but could it be a preview of a nasty Republican primary battle in 2024? You're streaming America Decides.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
it's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarsSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, oh, we're going to tell you about that, too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
the threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battery rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
The carnage in our nation's schools has become painfully repetitive.
Not one more child!
School shootings have parents fighting mad.
I promised my daughter I was going to fight. It's going to keep on happening.
And teachers taking lessons in how to fight back.
This is an exercise.
We approach it as it's you or them.
It shouldn't have to be your teacher's job to protect your life.
But will the battle over gun control,
people are afraid that they're going to lose their gun rights altogether,
be the hardest lesson of all?
The exercise, you're having to shoot at an adult. Are you prepared to have to kill one of your students?
Guns in the Classroom, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Everybody wakes up in the morning and they are pelted with alerts that frighten them, news that agitates them. With this show, we have the time to explain what's going on. Here's a deeper understanding of what's happening.
Prime Time with John Dickerson. Stream on the free CBS News app.
We lost the Senate in 2020. Biden becomes president and has done a huge amount of damage. I think the party has developed a culture of losing. I think that there's not accountability.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was Florida Governor Ron DeSantis responding to a question about whether Trump lost the 2020 election. It comes as the Never Back Down super PAC, which promotes a 2024 DeSantis presidential bid, has revealed that they have plans to ramp up some hiring in early primary states. And for more, let's bring in Erin Perini. She's the communications director for the Never Back Down PAC, which is supporting Ron DeSantis. Erin, good to see you. We had just seen the governor out in Iowa, and there he made a comment about wanting the Republican Party to essentially move on, he suggested. He said that the Republican Party has developed a culture of losing. Does that mean that he acknowledges that Trump lost the 2020 election?
It certainly acknowledges the reality that Republicans have not been winning elections across the board. We have Joe Biden in the White House because Republicans lost. But we did see Republicans beat back that losing streak a little bit and bring back the House, but we've lost the Senate. If Republicans want to win in 2024, it's very clear what needs to happen. And we're seeing it in the national head-to-heads here, which you see where DeSantis beats Biden and Biden beats Trump. If Republicans want to win in 24, their best chance to do that is with Ron DeSantis. And that's why this super PAC exists. That's why Never Back Down. This grassroots movement is growing to get Ron DeSantis in the race. We hope he does, because we know he would be a formidable candidate on the Republican side to win the White House.
And Erin, speaking of some of those polls, you mentioned those head-to-head matchups, but also when you look at the polls, Donald Trump has maintained a lead pretty much this whole time. Obviously, it's early. Obviously, things will change. But how do you see DeSantis cutting into that lead?
Well, there are a couple of things to look at, right? Right now, Ron DeSantis is not an announced candidate for president, but it is very clear, should he get in the race, this would be a two-man race for the Republican nomination. And look at Iowa just over the weekend. You talked about it a little bit. 37 legislators stepped up, the largest in modern political history, and endorsed him before he had even announced a potential candidacy on the Republican side. That is showing a grassroots movement, and underpinning in the party, in the base of the party, that's saying we want a different direction for our party, one that can win. Ron DeSantis has never lost an election or a fight, and you're starting to see that more people are coming out to say, hey, it's a safe space to come and be part of this grassroots movement to get Ron DeSantis in this race.
And I do want to get to some of the policy in a moment, just going kind of back to the strategy here. You know, DeSantis has been criticized from some Republicans within Florida for not doing that kind of outreach that candidates typically do, for not having that kind of one-on-one interaction, or, you know, showing, you know, the traditional signs of trying to court support. Is there anything that you would like him to change, do differently, to adapt to?
Well, again, Governor DeSantis is not an announced candidate, so he can't be asking for endorsements for a race he isn't in. But I can tell you, I was in Iowa this weekend with the governor as he was out there shaking hands, working the room, connecting with voters, connecting with Iowans across the state. And it was incredible to see how people really gravitated toward him. They heard his story. They heard about his success in Florida. I think the governor is doing an exceptional job talking to people, everyday Americans, about the direction of our country and the direction of our party, and the failures of the Biden administration versus the success we've seen in Florida on his watch. You'll continue to see more of that.
And just to pick up on that last point, Ron DeSantis did sign a 6-week abortion ban into law in Florida. Is that something that he wants to see implemented at the federal level?
I certainly can't speak to that directly, but what I can show you are 2 states where you have seen that there was election victory after protecting life. Governor DeSantis is one of the most pro-life governors in the country, protecting children who are having heartbeats. That's incredible legislative work. You saw in both Ohio and in Georgia, where those governors stood up, protected lives, signed 6-week abortion protections for children, and continued to see electoral success. Governor DeSantis has always been pro-life. He will continue to be pro-life, and you have seen that with that 6-week legislation to protect children in Florida.
And the big question is when he will decide to get in that race. Is your thinking in the next couple of weeks as has been reported.
There's nothing I can preview on that front, but I can tell you I was in Iowa this weekend. There were supporters everywhere, people shaking his hand, encouraging him to get in this race. When and if he decides to get in this race, it will be an incredible moment of change for this country, because this is a candidate, if he decides to become one, who really has a record of conservative success that could be hugely successful for the rest of America. And this grassroots movement is ready to go should Governor DeSantis decide to get in.
All right, and we are keeping an eye on when that decision is in fact made, of course. Erin Perini, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
North Carolina's Democratic governor just vetoed a 12-week abortion ban in his state, but Republicans have the votes to override it after a Democrat switched parties. Governor Roy Cooper joins us next. You're streaming America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman.
Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur Serena Williams.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job? I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Welcome back to America Decides. North Carolina Democratic Governor Roy Cooper has vetoed a 12-week abortion ban passed by his state's Republican-controlled legislature. But despite Cooper signing the veto Saturday, the GOP-controlled State House and Senate, which both hold a supermajority, are expected to override that veto, making the ban into state law. And Democratic Governor Roy Cooper joins us now for more on this. Governor, good to see you. Thanks for being here. Let's talk about this veto threat or overriding the veto. Does the Republican Party have enough votes now to override your veto? Are you expecting that?
Well, right now they have a supermajority Republican Senate and a supermajority Republican House, but only by 1 vote in each chamber. That means I only need one Republican to step up and have the courage to do the right thing to sustain this veto. And make no mistake about it, a vote to override my veto is a vote to ban abortions. This legislation makes it so much harder for women to be able to access reproductive care, particularly those women who are poor, who have to travel a ways to get there, with all of the obstacles that they have put in the way of women, with the obstacles that they are putting in the way of these clinics. This is an effective ban on abortion for many women. And I'm hoping we can get one Republican to keep a campaign promise. There are at least 4 of them who said they would protect women's reproductive freedom. And it's time for them to do what they told their constituents they were going to do.
So what have you been doing behind the scenes to try to convince them not to go through with this? And is there anything that you'd be willing to negotiate to change this bill so that they could support something you support? Are there any limits you would support?
So what they have done is they've made an extreme move here to ban abortions in North Carolina. They have no intention of negotiating with us. They did this in secret. They would not allow any Democratic amendments. They kept this under lock and key until they rolled it out, and they passed it in 42 hours. What we're trying to do now is to educate the public on what this legislation actually does. And we're hoping that someone who knows these Republicans, one of their constituents, maybe it's a doctor, maybe it's a minister, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's someone that they trust, would lay this out to the legislators and say, look, you promised to us that you would protect women's reproductive freedom. And if you vote to override this veto, what you're doing is banning abortions for many women.
So you're hoping that the public pressure campaign is the motivating factor here. But, you know, this bill, compared to others that have been passed in neighboring states, isn't as restrictive. It's about 12 weeks. It does include some exceptions as well. So how, you know, is there a middle ground that you can find here?
That's what North Carolina Republicans want you to think, that this is less restrictive than other states, when in actuality, they've dressed this up as a reasonable 12-week ban. But what they've done is made it so much harder for women to be able to access abortion at any time during the process, requiring 3 in-person appointments, cutting off medication abortion at 10 weeks. Those are the kinds of things that they have done to make this an extreme piece of legislation, not a whole lot different from what they're doing in other states. They just tried to dress this up and make it look better. Democrats in North Carolina have come together, and what we want to do is codify Roe v. Wade. Every single Democrat in our state introduced and co-sponsored legislation that would codify Roe v. Wade. And what we get from this legislature is this extreme ban. All we need is one Republican to step up and say, that's not right, to go to the Republican leadership and say, we need to stop this. And we're hoping that this education of the public will result in not only people telling legislators what they believe that should happen here, but also I think it's going to educate some of the Republican legislators. They kept this thing so tight that many of the Republican legislators couldn't answer questions on the floor and really didn't know what they were voting on. Now that we know what a horrible bill this is, now that we know what a disaster this is for North Carolina, now that we know that this legislation is going to hurt women across North Carolina, it's time to say, wait a minute, we don't need to do this.
Governor, if they do end up being able to override your veto, is there anything that you can do unilaterally on the issue of abortion?
We will never stop fighting to protect women's health. Never, ever stop fighting to protect the health of women here.
What does that look
Already,
like?
through executive action, I have worked to try and make this easier, make this process better for North Carolina. And I'll look at all ways that I can use executive authority. We would work through the courts. We will never stop fighting here.
And Governor, the reason that you and Democrats are in this position is because a Democratic member of the legislature, Tricia Cotham, switched parties to the Republican Party. What does that say about the Democratic Party that you had a lawmaker leave and switch, and you are in this position now? And have you spoken with her?
Certainly, I've spoken with her quite a bit. And what I have asked her to do is to keep the promises that she has made to her constituents. She has been a strong protector of women's reproductive rights over the years. She made a statement about wanting to have freedom of thought as one of her reasons why she wanted to switch from the Democratic to the Republican Party. I would ask her to use that freedom of thought right now. I would ask her to stand up to her new party, just like she did her old party, particularly when it comes to protecting women's health. That's something that's been very important to her, something that she has continued to tell her constituents that she would protect. Now is the time for her to show it. I mean, she can create a legacy in this state by stopping this, because all we need is one Republican.
All right, well, we will keep an eye on what happens in the legislature in the coming days. And of course, North Carolina, big battleground state in the next presidential election as well. Governor Cooper, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks so much.
And that does it for us today. You can stream America Decides Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. We're streaming CBS News.
It's a history-making meeting. 4 extraordinary women who are all 4-star generals and admirals.
How did you deal with being discriminated against?
I just worked harder.
The future of an ever-evolving U.S. military when we go